You're listening to Sanctified Secrets, the stories buried beneath cemeteries and silence. This is the true account of Etta Raines, the woman they called the Smiling Widow of Millfield. The year was 1883. Millfield, Ohio stood quiet under low skies, a coal town wrapped in fog and shale. It was the kind of place that grew downward, where trees bent toward the earth, where the roads seemed to curve away from the truth. By the time anyone heard her name, it was already too late. Etta Raines arrived in February, alone. She came by wagon from the east with no family beside her, no references, just a trunk made of cherry wood, a black parasol, and letters no one ever opened. The man who drove her said she didn't blink much, that her breath never fogged the glass, that her voice was thin but sweet, that she smelled like dried roses and wet iron. She rented a room at the Holloway boarding house, paid 3 months in advance, wrote her name in the logbook in the cleanest penmanship the landlady had ever seen. She slept with the windows sealed and the lamp unlit. Her gloves were velvet, her boots left no mud, and her door never creaked. By March, she was seen walking beside Thaddeus Wright, the storekeeper, a man of habit. His collar always pressed, his shoes always shined, a widower with no children, known for never missing church. But he stopped attending, stopped speaking to neighbors. He walked slowly now, eyes sunken, face pale, yet he followed Etta like a shadow, never touching her, always just behind. In June, they married in the parlor of the undertaker's home. No guests, no family. The minister said she never smiled, but her eyes gleamed like glass. The photographer said his camera jammed 3 times. The only image he captured was too blurred to develop. They lived above the store, where his first wife had died in the heat of 1874. Locals whispered about the rooms staying cold despite the stove, that the air in the hallway smelled faintly of soap and something metallic. In August, Thaddeus began closing early. Customers said he seemed confused, as if time passed strangely in the shop. He'd stare at the same can of flour for minutes at a time. His brother came by once and said Thaddeus didn't recognize him. On the first morning of September, his body was found near the cellar door, hands curled, mouth open, eyes locked toward something unseen. No blood, no wound, just silence. The town doctor signed it off as heart failure. Etta stood beside the grave with a black veil that reached her waist. She said nothing, not even to the minister. But the undertaker's apprentice claimed her lips moved during the burial, like she was reciting something. A list, a spell, a name. She sold the store the following week, moved to the cottage at the edge of the woods, a place with no neighbors, a place that even the postman avoided. She covered the windows in heavy lace, never opened them, hung no lamp outside. The children in town said they saw her walking the property at dusk, barefoot, holding her gloves instead of wearing them, always brushing her long dark hair, always smiling, but never at them. That winter, she married again. Elijah Hunt, a tinsmith, a man who spoke too fast and drank too little. He had 4 children, sent them away within days of the wedding. The cousins who took them in said the children never spoke of Millfield again. Elijah was last seen walking toward the river. His boots were found lined up by the bank. The water never gave him back. The sheriff said accident, but no one believed it. Etta wore the same dress to his funeral, the same gloves, the same smile. By spring, she was seen less. But the stories grew. The constable began keeping a journal. He wrote that animals avoided her garden, that the shadows near her house moved slower, that he saw her reflection blink when she didn't. One morning he vanished. His journal disappeared with him. Only his badge remained, found buried in her rose bed. Still warm to the touch, and still she smiled. The church bells rang hollow that spring and no one mentioned her name aloud, but everyone watched the cottage from a distance, as if the trees themselves might carry her voice. The ground near her porch began to crack along the edges, even though there had been no frost. The birds that used to nest in the sycamore stayed away now, and even the mice that fed on grain from the mill refused to cross her fence line one morning in April. The milkman saw smoke rising from her chimney, but when he passed again an hour later, there was no scent of ash, no warmth in the air, and the curtains were undisturbed, just as they always were, unmoving as if stitched to the wall. That same week, the widow Ellen Pike died in her sleep. Her daughter said she had nightmares every night before it happened, dreams of black lace and red strings tied to every door in town, and in the final night, she awoke screaming, "Don't let her come inside. Don't let her wear my face." The funeral was held quietly under gray skies. Etta did not attend, but a woman matching her height was seen walking through the far tree-line, umbrella open though there was no rain, and gloves held gently in one hand. A few days later, the undertaker's apprentice quit his job and left Millfield entirely without notice. He left behind his tools and his coat, but his journal was found stuffed beneath the floorboards in the embalming room. One page was torn and stained, but legible. It read, "I watched her pass the mirror and her reflection stayed behind." The page ended without a date. The townspeople no longer spoke openly of her. They crossed the street if she was walking and no one knocked on her door, not even the tax collector. The sheriff came once to check on the property, but never left his horse. He said later that he felt something looking out through the glass, not at him, but through him, as if it were trying to find something else, something older. One summer night, 3 boys dared each other to walk past her house. They carried a lantern and tied a bell to the fence to prove they made it to the gate when they returned. They said nothing, just handed the bell back and refused to speak for a week. One of them left town the next month. His mother said he started drawing faces on the walls of his room, and none of them were his own. Back in the hills, 2 goats were found with broken legs lying side by side. Not a mark of struggle, not a bite, not a trace, just stillness and flies. Etta's garden bloomed through the drought season, and no one knew what she watered it with. The lilies never wilted and her roses turned black but did not rot. Even the bees avoided them. Her chimney never smoked again, but the lights in her windows flickered late at night as if by candle, though no one ever saw her buy wax. No one ever saw her buy anything. She was not seen at the market, and yet she never lacked. And when people walked past, they said the scent of perfume clung to the air long after they turned the corner, a scent they could never name. But that reminded them of loss. The schoolmaster kept a ledger of strange things. Though he never said it aloud, he believed something was changing in Millfield. Something slow, something thick, like syrup in a glass. By autumn, he recorded 4 students who stopped speaking altogether. One who tore out every page of his primer and stared at the blank covers for an hour, and another who simply left class and walked toward the woods, before being brought back soaked to the knees, unable to say where he'd gone. The schoolmaster once walked the long way home past Etta's cottage and claimed he saw a cat perched on her roof, watching not the birds but the moon as though waiting for a signal. 2 weeks later, he resigned his post, left a note that read, "Her house knows I have no prayers," and was never seen again. The mail began arriving in town with no postmarks, no stamps, no return address, just envelopes of hair tied with string and folded cloth inside. Each was a single word written in red ink, always the same name, Eliza. No one in town bore it, not since the fire of 1861, when Eliza Greaves burned in the chapel holding the hymnal still open to page 33. The name was carved onto the roots of a tree near Etta's home. Though no one admitted to doing it, the sheriff went back a second time. This time he brought a constable and a priest. The priest never spoke a word after he returned, but he dropped his crucifix into the well behind the church and refused to take confession again. The constable kept his badge beneath his pillow and began sleeping with the light on. By winter, both had moved away from Millfield within days of each other. The sheriff stayed, but he no longer visited the north side of town, and his left hand began to tremble whenever someone asked about the widow. The town's records showed no purchases under her name, no taxes, no trades, no sales, no witnesses to any transaction. Yet her chimney remained. Swept her porch, repaired her curtains freshly hung. By February, a young man passing through claimed he met a woman in the woods. Her hands gloved, her mouth curved into a smile. She asked him if he remembered the hymn that stops the heart. He said no. And when he reached for his canteen, he found his arms would not lift. The next morning, he woke in the alley beside the tailor shop, lips stained with something sweet and red. The doctor treated him for exposure but could not explain why he could only whisper he left town before the week was over. No one questioned it. The church bell broke that spring. The rope shredded as though by blade, not weather, and inside the chapel the hymnals all opened to the same page, number 33. The page Eliza had held the priest's house was found empty, the crucifix he once dropped now resting on his dining table. Though the well had never been emptied, the corners of Etta's home began to lean as if bowing inward to something sleeping inside, and the porch light that never worked flickered once each night at the same hour, but only if you didn't look directly at it. The shoemaker's daughter was the first to say she saw Etta change not in shape or size, but in light. She said Etta walked into a shadow and did not come out, that what returned looked like her, spoke like her, even smiled like her. But something was missing beneath the skin. A weight. A warmth. The daughter was 13 and spoke in rhyme for a month afterward, and no one could explain why her hair turned white. In a single night she stopped sleeping. She covered every mirror in her room, and her father nailed her window shut. The town had always been suspicious of silence, but now it feared sound too. Every creak, every wind tap was met with held breath. Dogs refused to pass the northern path. Children forgot names of people they had known for years. One woman came to church crying, claiming her baby's eyes had changed color overnight from green to black, as if stained. The reverend told her it was grief, told her it was fear. But when he visited the home himself, he said nothing, only left a note on the chapel door that read, "The gospel doesn't reach her kind." Not anymore that evening. He burned his own sermon book and rang the bell. Though the rope had long been gone, the bell made no sound, but every bird in the valley fled into the sky at once. No one saw Etta in daylight anymore, though some claimed she still walked at dusk, that she hummed to herself in patterns too perfect to be human, that she planted things not meant to bloom. Her garden now grew roots that twisted above the soil and leaves that turned toward the earth. A pale fungus formed in rings around her gate. Even when there'd been no rain, a traveler stopped to rest beneath her oak tree and woke with his hands blistered with symbols. The doctor said it was chemical, but found no cause. The marks never healed, and the man left town dragging one foot, as if something pulled against him. The smithy found his anvil, rusted overnight iron, gone soft to the touch, and the nails bent backward in their barrels. He claimed he heard tapping from beneath his floorboards, like someone counting when no one else was home. He moved to Lancaster by moonlight, left his forge unlocked the next morning. The hammer he'd forged himself was found at the base of Etta's front step, polished and warm to the touch. Her porch had no dust, no prints, but a trail of salt was laid across the threshold in the shape of a key. The widow never left her house after that, but her windows opened on windless nights, and sometimes a voice, not hers, spoke low through the cracks, not asking, not pleading, just speaking names that no one remembered but somehow knew. By midsummer, the blacksmith's forge had cooled for good, and the church steps grew moss no matter how many times they were scrubbed. The townspeople began whispering a single word under breath, a word older than scripture. A name scratched into stone behind the well house, too deep to chisel clean. The name was Etta's, but not as it had been spelled before, with an H, where there had been none, and 3 notches beneath it like tally marks. The widow's house began to echo with things it had not yet heard, voices not born in this world, laughter too slow to belong to children, footsteps that started near the chimney and stopped just before the front door. The baker's son began dreaming of ropes, red ones wrapped around the town. The dreams were so vivid that he woke with his wrists bruised and once with dried flour in his ears. Despite never sleeping near the bakery again, he stopped speaking entirely after he wandered too close to her garden and saw a flower open that had teeth instead of petals. The constable who took his statement lasted 1 more week before locking himself inside the jail and writing symbols on the walls in soot, a pattern that looked like a circle made of keys and hands. He vanished the next day, the door still locked from within. The only thing missing was his tongue. By late August, a crow was seen landing on her roof and bursting into cinders. The townspeople no longer walked near the path. The trees had grown too thick too fast, leaves that shimmered when no light touched them, branches that moved even when the wind was still. One man who wandered too close said he saw her in the doorway wearing a gown made of something that flickered. Not cloth, not lace, but something moving like breath caught in smoke, and her hands no longer matched each other. One was younger. One was made of something else entirely. He ran and did not stop until he reached the edge of the next town and never returned. The mayor who once denied the town's complaints about her resigned, without a letter, simply walked into the woods and was found 2 days later digging a hole with his bare hands, his fingernails gone, his eyes open but unseeing. He said nothing, but the doctor who checked his pulse found a word scrawled into his shirt collar, stitched in with fresh red thread. Bride. The town began to rot at its edges. Grass stopped growing on the west side, fences leaned toward the north soil. Curdled when tilled children were born with teeth, or not born at all. And still the widow smiled. Though she was never seen smiling anymore, the cottage windows remained lit from within. Even when the sun was high and no fire burned, and now the chimney hummed low each morning, a sound like breath in reverse. Not wind, not air, but something pulling from the world. The harvest failed that year, though the sky stayed clear. The rain came and went as always, but the crops turned black before ripening stalks twisted back into the soil, as if trying to bury themselves, and the apples fell hollow and dry, leaving behind seeds that sprouted worms before touching ground. Families who had lived on the same land for generations began leaving by night, wagons creaking away before first light. Entire homes left empty, plates, still set beds, still warm, as if something had walked in and asked them to go. The gravedigger at Millfield Cemetery claimed that one of the older stones had cracked from within. He said he heard a voice rise from the earth one night singing a hymn in reverse, and he sealed his ears with wax. Afterward, he was found curled behind the chapel, knees drawn to his chest, jaw locked, hands soaked in grave lime. The sheriff brought a priest from 3 towns away. This one younger, less worn, less frightened. They said the man walked into the widow's property holding a book in one hand and a brass cross in the other. He entered the gate at noon, and by dusk was found sitting on her steps, barefoot, eyes rolled white. The book torn in half and not a mark on him, no bruise, no blood. Just a single word written on his chest in soot. Forgiven. He never spoke again, and the cross he brought melted to the shape of a loop. The town no longer argued what she was. They only argued whether she had always been here, or if she had come from somewhere deeper. The children drew her in chalk. Not her face, just her hands. Long, too long, with fingers curled as if cradling something unseen. The dogs howled only at night and only in one direction, and the mice carried scraps into the woods, building tiny shrines of bone and twine. The blacksmith's hammer was found again. This time beneath the chapel bell, cracked into 3 pieces, laid in a triangle. Beside it was a glove, one of hers, still warm to the touch and dry. Despite the morning rain, the woman who cleaned the church claimed she saw light flickering in the rafters even after the lanterns were removed, and when she looked again she saw what looked like a woman seated between the beams. Legs folded, hands resting in her lap, smiling not at her, but past her, as though watching something that had not yet arrived. Her broom broke in her hands and she left town that same hour, never even locking the chapel door again. The door remained open every day after that, but no one crossed the threshold, even when the wind blew pages from the hymnal into the road, and the widow's garden bloomed in colors no eye had name for, curling upward and folding inward again, like something slowly learning how to breathe. The schoolhouse closed in October, not because of plague or storm, but because the children stopped speaking in class, not from fear, but as if their tongues no longer remembered how to shape sound. They would stare forward even when called upon. And once when the teacher wrote Etta's name on the board in warning, the chalk snapped in her hand, and the entire class turned to face the window in silence. She never returned. After that, her husband found her suitcase packed, but never remembered helping her do it. That winter, more doors were found open in the mornings, even when locked from within, and in one case nailed shut from the outside. The rooms beyond were always empty, save for a single black feather resting upright in the center of the floor, despite no birds having flown that season. One man swore he saw Etta walking backward through the orchard at dusk, holding something bundled in her arms when he called out to her. She turned, but only her head, and the thing she held opened its eyes and smiled. Not like a child, but like something pretending to be one the next morning. His teeth ached so badly they all cracked within the week. His house was found abandoned and his hearth still burning. The chimney filled with feathers, the town midwife who had once attended more than a dozen births in 1 year, now walked the streets at night muttering names that hadn't been spoken in a century. Names no one taught her, and yet she whispered them with clarity, always stopping in front of the widow's gate, always bowing slightly before walking on her shawl became covered in pins, all rusted, all bent into shapes. No one recognized by then the birds had stopped returning entirely, and the wind began to hum through the trees with voices that sounded familiar, but couldn't be placed. The windows of Etta's house began to flicker even in the full sun, not with light, but with motion like curtains pulled aside by unseen hands. And one child who stood too close said she saw not the widow but her own mother staring back from the glass, smiling and raising a finger to her lips as if to keep her quiet. The child stopped sleeping, and the next month her family moved to Kansas, leaving behind their farm tools, their dog, and their wedding photo, which was later found hanging inside the chapel, nailed where the crucifix used to be when the Reverend returned to remove it. He found every pew covered in dust except for one, and in that seat was a book open to a page that had not been printed yet, with a date 3 months ahead, and a name written in the margin. Etta Hunt, followed by the word returned. The ground near her home began to shift, not from storm or frost, but as if something below was breathing slowly, pressing against the soil, until the earth cracked along the roots and the grass grew in spirals. One farmer claimed his well ran black for a day, and when he dropped a torch into it, the light never reached bottom. Only the sound of something catching it mid-fall as if swallowed. He closed the farm within a week and moved east, leaving his tools behind and his dog tied to a tree. When neighbors tried to claim the land, they found the barn locked from within, and all the hay stacked into a perfect mound shaped like a sleeping body. The school bell rang once at midnight, though it had not hung for months, and the next morning the word "listen" was carved across the door, not in wood, but in something sticky and dark that hardened like lacquer. The widow was not seen, but her curtains now pulsed faintly, as if catching wind that wasn't there, and a low tapping began to echo from her chimney at night in sets of 3, always at the same hour, always too steady to be random. The sheriff made a final visit to her property, bringing with him the old town register, a book that recorded every birth and death for over a century. He planned to compare signatures to prove something, though he would not say what the deputy who waited by the gate claimed. He never saw the sheriff go inside, only that the book was later returned to the station with a single page torn out, and in its place a feather laid between the covers, pressed so flat it looked etched in the paper. From that day on, the sheriff would not enter any building with a mirror, and his hat was always worn low over his eyes. The town began to lose time. Clocks turned backward in the night. Sunrises came minutes later each week, and candles burned slower. No one could explain it, but the chapel hourglass that once tracked sermons began to drip upward, and the sand inside never emptied. Etta's house no longer looked like a house. Its shape bent, its windows too wide, its porch warped like driftwood. Her doorframe stretched as if something taller now passed beneath it, and when a coal vendor leaned too close to inspect it, he claimed he saw a stairway inside that didn't end, but curled downward, made of stone and bone and old rope. His beard turned white before winter, and he walked with a limp that no doctor could mend. The children, who once whispered stories of the smiling widow, now refused to speak her name at all. And one boy who tried to say it found his tongue locked behind his teeth until blood filled his mouth. The widow never opened her door, but each day a new flower appeared on her gate. Petals made of ash stem, thin as hair, and once touched, they vanished in a puff of warm air. By winter, the snow no longer fell near her home. It circled around the property, melting before it touched ground, and left the soil damp, as if it had wept instead of frozen. Those who passed her road at night said the air there felt warmer, not pleasant, but heavy like breath against the skin, and the lanterns dimmed as if pulled inward. One man claimed he saw his dead wife standing behind Etta's fence, holding their wedding ring in her hand when he reached for her. She smiled, but it was not her smile. It was Etta's, that smile that never opened too wide but always knew too much. He collapsed before touching the gate and was carried back to town. In silence, the ring was later found in his pocket. Though his wife had been buried with it and her grave remained undisturbed, the church began to lose its hymns. Books left open were found with blank pages. Lyrics faded mid-sentence, and once a bell chimed in the windless night. Even though no bell remained on the roof, the chapel's floor bowed downward as if something waited beneath the wood, and a sound like breathing could be heard. If one stood still at the pulpit, the new reverend left in spring without notice, leaving only a single candle lit and a note that read, "She was here before us. She will be here after the postman who once refused to walk past her home finally relented after a dare, but never reached the gate." He claimed the road grew longer with each step, and by the time he turned around, the town behind him had vanished entirely for 10 long minutes. He stood in that silence, surrounded by trees that did not move, before the lantern in his hand went out, and he heard laughter. Not loud, not cruel, but knowing when he returned he aged a year in his face. His hair slightly thinned, and his voice never steady again. Etta's house was seen to stretch once a window, shifting outward for a moment as if the structure yawned and exhaled. The birds never flew near it, and even the crows that once perched on her roof now circled higher, wider. Never landing, the fields near her land cracked in perfect rings, each exactly 5 feet across, as though something beneath was pushing gently upward, not to break through but to listen. Some children made a game of counting them, but stopped after they found one too fresh, too warm, and in the center of it a doll sat upright, its face stitched to resemble someone no one remembered, but every mother wept at the sight. The undertaker's ledger went missing, and in its place was a new book, leather-bound, heavy, its pages already half filled with names and dates, none of which had happened yet, and every third page marked with a single letter, H. By the first thaw, the trees near her home no longer bloomed. Instead, they blackened at the tips as if scorched from within, and their bark flaked off in curled sheets that whispered when the wind passed. No one dared burn the wood it hissed in the fire, and released a scent like spoiled honey and something else, something metallic. The roads leading to her property cracked in a spiral pattern, and moss grew in her footprints. Even on stone one night the town square lit without flame, every lantern flickering to life, and a humming began not from mouths or throats but from walls, beams, fences, even the dirt itself a low chord like the tuning of something old and hollow and waking. The millstone split clean in two, and inside it was a single coin older than the town itself, bearing no face, just a symbol, a circle of teeth around a darkened sun. The mayor's wife left without word, taking only a bundle wrapped in velvet. And when she passed the chapel steps, the candle inside the nave flared blue for 1 second, then died. The widow was seen once more near the edge of the woods, walking slowly backward into the fog, holding a small mirror in both hands, tilted not toward herself, but toward the ground behind her, as if letting something follow her reflection and not her form. By spring, the house had changed again, taller now, narrower, its windows all sealed with wax, its chimney quiet. But the hum remained, and the ground nearby sank in small pulses like something sleeping far below the town council no longer met. The schoolhouse was boarded. The bell tower collapsed with no sound, and the hourglass in the chapel stopped at 13 minutes before dawn. The well behind the gravedigger's shed filled with water for the first time in decades, but anything dropped in was never heard hitting bottom, and the surface always reflected something slightly wrong. A face nearly yours but not quite. The widow's garden bloomed entirely black that year, and the flowers bled sap that shimmered in candlelight. The constable's badge was found at the edge of her porch, bent into a crescent shape and wrapped in a single lock of white hair. No birds flew in Millfield now. No dogs barked, no crickets sang, but every night at exactly 3:21, the shutters on her upper window lifted slightly, and a hand drew them closed again, gently, slowly, as if not to wake what slept below. And some say if you press your ear to the chapel floor and breathe slowly enough, you can still hear her humming. Not to you, but to what is waiting to arrive, for what has always been beneath and listening and remembering from before the town was ever drawn on any map. The story of Etta Hunt ends here. Not in flame, not in blood, but in the silence that grows when no one speaks her name again. You have heard it, and now you must carry it quietly. This has been Sanctified Secrets.